Hello, I'm Guy, and this is Guy Robot. Hello! Today, I'm going to look at my very first ever computer. And this is quite an interesting one, because if the computer that's behind me now hadn't ever turned up, I probably wouldn't have started this YouTube channel. So before we get into the details, I'm going to briefly take you back. Around about early 2015, I had started to buy more vintage computers. I wanted to build up a collection of all the machines that I used to have. I think by that point I'd already got my Commodore 64, my BBC, but what I've been looking for ages and not found was the model of my very first PC. This was an IBM PS1, but it wasn't just any PS1, it was a specially compact one. It used a riser card for the ISA, it was a small form factor, it was quiet, it looked nice, it had foldy flaps, it was screwless for a lot of the interior and taking the case off as well. These are things that were revolutionary for what we're talking about, maybe 1992, 1993, when this machine was designed. Now, I got my original one from a used display model that was in a shop. I think I was probably 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, when I got it as a Christmas present one year. My Christmas present for 3 years. I had to convince my parents that I was allowed more Christmas presents a couple of years later. But it was the start of a massive journey for me. It took my whole experience with computers another level. I went from just working in BASIC to being able to do user interface designs and get a lot deeper into it, courtesy of the ones of Windows 3.1 at the time. And for a long time I used that machine. It stayed a part of my network for 7, 8, 9 years. First computer I ever put a network card in. And when I moved out of my parents' house when I was 18, it eventually went to a skip. It had been my DNS server for 2 or 3 years. When eventually there was a power cut, it never came back on. After that point, I eventually decided to bin it. Years later, I really wish I hadn't, because the honest truth is I didn't even put a monitor into it to see why it wouldn't boot. Because by that point, who wanted a rubbish old machine when there were newer ones? Now, as I got older, wanting to look back to my past made me really want one. And I never managed to find one on eBay. That is, until roughly May last year, when I found the exact model of my very first computer. But it wasn't just any version of it, it was a barely used model that had been kept in a box at the back of a warehouse for years. Admittedly, it was in Canada, which meant it had a sticker on it that my original one didn't have, and it was a 110 volt power supply, so I was going to need to get a converter for that. But I ordered it, and actually the guy who sent it me was one of the most helpful eBayers I ever had. He upgraded the insides for me, he gave me all the original parts, and the packaging on this thing was insane when I got it and opened it. It took weeks to arrive, and when it did arrive, it was just before everything kicked off last year, where I've mentioned previously there was some big live stuff that came on, and that's what ultimately led to my reboot of my life. But as a consequence of that, I didn't touch it at the time. I wasn't near a computer for a while, and it wasn't until I started to put my life back together this year. I thought, yeah, a year has gone past, now I want to play with it. And I started unboxing it, and I was just taken back. I instantly knew what it was going to do, despite the fact it has probably been, probably 17, 18 years since I last used this thing, and probably 20 years since I last regularly used it. So my wife said, God, you seem to really enjoy that. Why not start doing a video for it? And I got carried away, and I kind of set up Guy Robot. But today, I am going to do the video of me actually using this for more than 3 seconds for the first time. So, my very first ever computer was a 486 SX25 IBM PS1. It came with 4 megabytes of RAM and a 170 megabyte hard disk. I duly upgraded the RAM during my ownership of it to a whopping 8 megabytes, which at the time would have cost me over $200 for 4 additional megabytes. It came with no CD-ROM drive. It had no sound card. I had to buy a CD-ROM drive with a separate interface card for it, because it wasn't quite IDE, it wasn't quite SCSI, it was some really weird one. And I also had to buy a separate sound card, which back then came in a box this size and cost about another $200. However, The one that I've got here has been specced out. If I was trying to be cool, I would say it was tripped, but thankfully I'm not cool. This thing has got a few gigabytes of hard disk space. It's got as much RAM as the motherboard will support, slightly less because it turns out the motherboard doesn't actually support its maximum configuration. And it's good to go. It's also been set up to dual boot Windows 3.1 and Windows 95, so I'm looking forward to seeing this. Now, what I haven't attached to it yet is speakers. I haven't put it on the network. Well, it does have a network card in it. So, it's time for the big unveil. Welcome to my IBM PS1. Well, here it is. You may have noticed in some of the pictures there was a post-it note that came from it. This was from the awesome guy that sold me this. When I opened the box, I was over the moon. Not only was everything packed up and labelled perfectly, but there was a note inside welcoming me, almost as if from the past, considering it was a year since I'd ordered it. So I need to give a big shout out to the guy on eBay that sold me this. I've never had such an awesome eBayer who cared so much about a transaction. So thank you. It was worth every penny. And it says, here it is. All the original hardware is underneath the styrofoam. If after booting to 3.11 you reboot to 95 and it reboots, don't be alarmed, it's by design. Boot 95 again and it will work. That makes sense based on the hard disk of the era and, well, the capabilities and its size. So, as you can see, it is perfectly clean. It's beautiful. This keyboard, incidentally, I always type in, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. And I test the keyboard. Don't quite know why. This must have done so much programming for me over the years, and this one is almost immaculately shiny white. I have an original IBM PS1 mouse, and I have a definitely not so new Dell Ultrasharp 15-inch monitor. Original Intel Inside stickers, and oh, the beautiful fold-down flap. The only difference from my original one is mine didn't say consultant there. So, moment of truth. Let's turn it on. Oh, we have 3 green lights on a keyboard. We have a flashing screen. And bang, begin the RAM count. Now we've got to 4 meg, which was as much as I ever had. We've now exceeded, 8, we've exceeded that. 16 meg, we are now in the land of fantasy for when this machine came out. 32 megabytes of RAM I did not have for quite some time after getting rid of this. 36 meg of RAM, what an odd number. If I recall, the motherboard didn't support the full amount it was supposed to. But, here we go. Spacebar to boot from diskette. Or, we are in Smart Boot Manager. So, let's go for a blast from the past, and let's boot to Windows 3.11. Now, some of you will have never actually seen this. But this is how you used to get into Windows. First of all, you loaded all of your drivers in DOS, which sometimes worked, and you normally had to fiddle to make them all fit into the incredibly tiny memory footprint. Then you'd start Windows, which wasn't actually an operating system, but more of a GUI overlay on top. If you haven't ever seen Windows 3.1 before, be prepared for a pleasant surprise. This is the for workgroups variant of it. The idea being, if you were too cheap to buy the proper NT version, you could run this in your office. Now, I did have the Windows workgroups. In fact, I had the box copy of it because I liked the idea of having file shares on Windows. It was a novel idea. Wow, this is taking me back. Ta-da! We are now at the Windows desktop. I say Windows desktop, this was called Program Manager, not the desktop. Now, the visual effects are not quite as good. You'll notice there is no window drag. But it's functional. This was the equivalent of your desktop and start menu all rolled into one. Your taskbar was merely whenever you minimized an icon, it appeared down here. And instead of Task Manager, you just got the task list where you could kill something if you want to. I'm going to go bye-bye clock, and it's gone. Program Manager was still present in the early Windows 9X days. In fact, I preferred it to the Windows desktop for a long time and actually used this in Windows 95. The key thing you've got here is File Manager. Now, this is your old Explorer window. A lot of Windows still works. You can double-click, but wow, that redraw time is a long time. I would be really sad if my code ended up looking like that these days. However, at the time, this was cutting edge. It does work. I don't really know what we're going to do on here. Probably not a huge amount for now. And run. Start run. Ooh. It wasn't CMD back then. It was command.com. Now, we are running DOS within Windows, but Windows is just on top of DOS. All kinds of weird things happen there, and nothing ever quite worked as you wanted to expect it. Apparently, I can make this a window. Ta-da! The other really important thing to note with Windows 3.1 and all its variants up to 95 is it wasn't really multitasking. Not only were the graphics pretty terrible, and trying to ever get this to run in more than 640 by 480 was a miracle, which I only ever achieved a very small number of times on different hardware, but it wasn't really multitasking. Not in the same way that we have on Windows these days. It was a bit of a hack to make it look like it was, but really it was glorified single tasking. Oh, this takes me to the clipbook viewer. Have you ever wondered what you had copy into your clipboard? No? Wow. You maybe should have done. Let's see. Now, if memory serves, I can now go into clipbook viewer, look in my clipboard, and look, I've copied some text in there. Now, you would think it would be okay just to paste it somewhere, but we in the old days used to have an application just to see what was in clipboard. Probably quite useful these days, considering the amount of stuff you can put in clipboard. It came with a sound recorder. It came with Windows Media Player, although just called Media Player then, and that was it. Didn't really do a lot. Don't know if we've got any movies we can watch. Ooh, all files, because we didn't really know what videos were back then, and we certainly didn't have any because they were massive. Trying to have a video back in those days was crazy, hence CD-ROM drives came into being. And we have all of the Creative Lab software, which, recollection serves, was awesome, so maybe we should have a look and see whether it actually was. Okay, that looks pretty cool for its time, bearing in mind we're talking early 1990s here. Let's load the MIDI one, let's load Creative Wave. I do have a DAT drive. Creative CD. CD not inserted. Good to know. And that is the sound recorder that I remember. I would have done a lot of recording on that back in the day. And so that's how you run programs. I mean, the thing that's taken me about this, I am just clicking buttons and talking randomly about it for now, is that actually it's not that bad. I mean, yes, this isn't on the internet yet. I could get a version of Netscape for it and install it. That would be an interesting one. Shall we do that? Do I have a network cable? Let's do a jump cut. So I decided I was going to configure the network. I'd forgotten quite how much was going to be involved in it, and for authenticity's sake, I originally thought I was going to use floppy disks for everything. The first step was getting the TCP/IP stack for Windows 3.11, as TCP/IP networking isn't included by default. That involved downloading a 700 kilobyte file from Microsoft's website. Now, to me, the fact that you could develop the entire TCP/IP networking stack in a couple of months and it would fit into 600k is ludicrous, but that does take you back to how simple things were back then. Once that was copied across, which took a very, very long time, it was then a case of going in, adding the network card, and entering IRQ and IO address. Now, I'd forgotten you actually had to do this in the old days, so I had to reboot to Windows 95 and copy the settings from there. This was before the days of plug and play. These days, you put in a piece of hardware and your computer discovers it. Back then, you had to actually configure the hardware and enter all the settings for it. And then you could tell Windows where to look to find it. Once that's done, you can then add the TCP/IP networking stack. And the settings then are much the same as setting up nowadays. Enter your IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, and other DNS settings. Although I do like the fact that DNS is actually hidden away and WINS is the default one that's displayable. I think that's testament to where we were with computers at the time. Now, a ridiculously optimistic part of me thought I could get away without doing a reboot here. It became apparent that definitely wasn't going to work. So, a quick reboot later, I use the word lightly, as actually it takes many, many minutes to start. The networking was showing as active in the DOS part of it. Bang! It became obvious that something wasn't working. An error appeared in Windows. I did do a little hunting down to try and figure out what this was, and I suddenly realised that it probably was because the card that was in there was dual plug and play and non-plug and play, something I'd forgotten even existed. And Windows 95 was picking it up from plug and play. So That's when I realised I was going to have to get old school, open up the computer and configure the IRQ and I/O lines. So here we are inside the computer. Now I've taken the sound card out and you can see the network card. Down here are a row of jumpers. This is where we configure the I/O and the IRQ for the card. Unfortunately, we're going to need to find the manual for this. Now, the awesome thing is, this is a genuine Novell network card. I think I say that with hesitance. There's a network sticker on it. Doesn't mean it's genuine. It does just say plug and play Ethernet card. That's not promising. So I think the next step is I'm going to do some jump cuts here after taking this card out, because what I need to do is find a manual for this network card and figure out what those jumpers are. Without knowing what the jumpers should be, I can't really set them. Without being able to set them, they're only going to work in Windows 95 because it's plug and play. Now this is quite an advanced card, considering as most of them didn't even support plug and play when I had them. In fact, plug and play didn't even exist when I had this machine originally. Right, let's take that one out. Oh. Ta-da! One network card with a 10-base T adapter. Oh! Whoever manufactured this board is godly. You have just saved the day. Instead of a manual, you've written it on the back. This is what hardware used to be like. So, an IRQ of 15 is all the IRQ3 turned on. So that final pin is for jumper modes. Then we should have 2 on, 2 off for 280, 111, and 1. There you are. We have just done some binary. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ones and zeros in there. That is 1 byte of memory space set via jumpers. And that says our IRQ, our I/O address, and it says that we're not in plug and play mode anymore. Excellent. Before we do it back up, let's take a look inside. This is the incredibly tidy computer. PSU, riser for 3 ISA cards, memory bank, CPU is just under there, floppy drive, CD-ROM, and the hard disk is under there. Nice cable management. This is an engineering design that someone somewhere out there should be very proud of. So, I'm going to do a jump cut while we put this back together. Once that was done, the next bit was supposed to be easy. The idea was that I would reboot into Windows and everything would miraculously start. Sadly, as was often the case in the good old days, even more so than now, that's not what happened. I rebooted and nothing would start whatsoever. My first thought was that actually it was something to do with the conflict between the sound card and the network card using the same IRQ and I/O. So I did what I would have done 20 years ago. I manually went through the configsys and auto-exec files, initially skipping what I wanted to load and seeing if it got into Windows. Now without networking, it got in fine. With simple networking, started as we see here from the command prompt. It worked, but that wasn't enough to actually start the TCP/IP stack. As soon as I tried to do TCP/IP, Windows wouldn't boot. Did figure out what the problem was though. It was the fact that the network cable wasn't plugged in. Yep, that's right. If the network cable's not plugged in, Windows didn't even start. What a wonderful world. However, with the network cables plugged in, we have full TCP/IP networking. Now this isn't the fastest in the world. It was doing 2.5 megabit a second over my gigabit LAN, which considering it was a 10 megabit card is still pretty shocking. Just to download the 5 megabyte Netscape took the best part of 20 seconds. Once however it was downloaded, it didn't work. So I had to get a different version, having tried many different ways to get it. Pull that down, wait even longer. Then I had to unzip the setup program, which also incidentally took an absolute age. And there we have it, the Netscape Navigator gold logo, which I've not seen in quite some time. The setup took so long, considering this was a faster hard disk than was available in the day, and it was installing from a hard disk, not floppy disks. It still took minutes to install, although it did take me back forgetting that every single setup program used to look at that hideous back when I used to use them all the time. So I thought, let's try Google. That's the simplest thing in the world. Turns out, no. Actually, using Google completely killed this thing. There were so many JavaScript pop-up errors that I literally couldn't kill them all. I went through trying to close them all, trying to end task, and no matter what I did, they wouldn't go away, to the point that I actually had to restart Windows just to get rid of it. And honestly, no websites worked particularly well. So, after a brief reboot to Windows, for some reason I thought it might be a sensible idea to try exactly the same thing again. Turns out it's not a sensible idea to try exactly the same thing again. Trying to think of something I could use on the internet these days that was simple enough that it would render turned out to be surprisingly difficult, as everything's got crazy amounts of JavaScript, and everything else that I could think of is using HTTPS with certificates and protocols that just weren't supported 20 years ago. So even getting around the most basic parts of the internet just doesn't work these days. But disabling JavaScript, increasing the network buffer size to load things a bit quicker, did mean I could get onto the Google search pages. It might not look quite correct, but hey, this is a computer from 1995, 1993 maybe, that's actually on Google in a web browser all these years later. To be fair, I thought I'd also give it a try in Windows 95. Now, Windows 95 took a hell of a lot longer to start and was actually slower for day-to-day loading. I also had to reset up the network card. But once I'd set it up, Internet Explorer 5.5 worked a hell of a lot better. The network card worked a lot better. The page actually looks right. I still had the same issues with HTTPS. It's not like I was going to do much else, but credits to it for loading. As a final kind of testament to remembering the good old days, I remembered this hidden gem in Windows 3.11. That's right, in every single about screen in Windows, there was a magic key combination where you could get a little rolling credit of all the people that were there. In this one, Steve Ballmer appeared to talk me through it. I think there was also a ferret and Bill Gates, as well as a couple of other people. Okay, so that was pretty awesome for me. I'm not sure that video ended up quite how I intended it to, but maybe it did. This for me was an awesome trip down memory lane. I haven't used Windows 3.1 in like 20 years. So being able to poke around and play with it again, and actually dismantling the computer a little bit and flipping some jumpers to get IRQ and IO set up was quite fun. I was actually only planning on having a quick whiz through of Windows and looking at the apps that were there, but actually managing to get the machine on the internet was awesome. I don't even think I ever got Windows 3.1 working on TCP/IP networking back when I used it originally. I think I've moved to 3.5.1 for that. So that was pretty awesome, and I'm really happy with it. In fact, I'm just smiling from using it. It just took me back so much to my past. However, these were rubbish, and that's kind of why we have memory sticks now. Like 2 minutes to copy a file, that's just nuts. But thankfully, we don't need to use these anymore. And that machine doesn't even need to use it anymore now that I've managed to get networking set up on it. So that's awesome. We did briefly look at Windows 95 on it, but 95 never excited me quite as much, and I remembered how slow it was. That's why when I actually got Windows 95 when it came out on that machine, I used it for a couple of weeks, and then I reverted back to 3.1.1. And it's because Windows 95 was so slow by comparison. It wasn't until I actually started using the internet a couple of years later regularly that I thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this upgrade now. So what am I going to do with it now? Well, actually, I've got a whole bunch of servers over there, which I haven't actually ever plugged in or turned on since I got them. They are from the same era as this. They are kind of P75s, really underpowered for today, but ridiculous supercomputers for its time. I think one of them is even a dual or quad CPU one. So the plan is to get them set up as Windows NT servers, and I also want to get Windows NT Workstation installed on there. I've got my floppy drive, I've got my floppy disks, I've got the images for Windows NT 3.5.1, so I should be able to do it and set up an old domain, and hopefully then get something that's slightly less rubbish. What am I going to do after that point? Probably not a lot. I just like the idea of getting an old vintage network set up. So this was the first step in it. The main thing was I really enjoy going back to memory lane. That is the best thing I have purchased in many years. It might have cost me a few £100, but I'm over the moon that I now have my very first PC back in. I learned to do coding for PCs on that. I learned how to hack around in Windows. I learned what the registry was. I learned how to do everything in DOS. I even installed Linux on it as my first computer with Linux, I think. In fact, I went on the internet for the first time. Was probably that computer as well. Now, this might not be the exact same one, but suffice to say, I spent thousands of hours, I dare say, sat in front of that. 4 years maybe with that computer. I experienced a lot in that time, and I'm glad I got it back. Hopefully I got to share some of that with you. Now, I know this isn't exactly cutting edge, but hey, that's why it's in my vintage collection. I hope this was somewhat interesting, because I've got loads more vintage stuff I want to play with. I've got the servers I want to set up to work with this. We can have a primary and a backup domain controller. No forests, because hey, no Active Directory, but hey, who cares? I've got a Sun workstation, and more importantly than that, I have 2 giant Sun servers, which are like 8 12U beasts that I can get set up, so we can have a Solaris network running. And I've got all the projects with my BBCB and C65 I want to do. So please let me know in the comments whether you liked this video or whether you thought it sucked. But as long as I know what you do or don't like, I can do more videos accordingly. And please don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Please check out some of my other videos. And don't forget to subscribe.